let's walk through the edit of an 850 nanometer infrared monochrome image using Lightroom Classic. Here's the image straight out of camera. Here's the image after our edit. This image was shot on my full spectrum Fujifilm GFX 50S. The lens is the Roker X 45mm f2. This is a vintage full frame lens on a medium format body, so it's very sharp in the center of the image and not so much in the corners. The filter used to capture this image was the STC Optics 850 IRP, which is a clip-in filter, so it fits between the camera body and the lens in the flange area. You can get similar results to this with an 830 nanometer filter or even a 720 nanometer filter. The first thing that I want to do when editing an image like this is make sure that Lightroom is prepared with a good preview. I'm going to go to the library module by hitting the E key. And then once in the library module, I'm going to go under library, the library drop-down menu, and then previews, and then build one-to-one preview. I've already done that for this image. That will allow Lightroom to have a good preview to work with, and it'll improve the response time while you're editing the image. Now we'll go back to the develop module by hitting the D key. This image is probably slightly underexposed. So before I do anything, let me just nudge up the exposure about a third of a stop. The first thing that we typically do with an infrared image is set a profile and worry about white balance. Well, that's actually a little bit different with a monochrome image because we don't need to worry about white balance and we don't need special profiles in order to set up the image. What we can use is any monochrome profiles. So what I'm going to do is over in the basic panel, I'm going to click on the Profile Manager, and this will open up all the profiles that are available. There's a variety of profiles we can use. We can really use any monochrome profile that comes with Lightroom. So I'm going to go into Adobe RAW first, and you'll see we've got Adobe Monochrome, so that's a viable option. Also, in camera matching, Adobe will provide a number of monochrome profiles that match any that would come with your camera. For Fujifilm, this is across. You may have some for your other camera as well, and you can try these. And basically, you'll want to just roll your mouse over each one of these profiles to get a preview to see what it does to your image. Each profile will have a slightly different sort of starting point that we want to work with. So we can look at the camera matching profiles. And then finally, we can go down to the BNW, the black and white group, where there's a large number of monochrome profiles that give a whole different variety of looks. I'll roll my mouse over each of these and take a look at what the resulting image is. How does it affect the sky? How does it affect the building in this case? The one that I like so far is number 2. So I'll highlight that one. Then we'll kind of move down and I can compare. I can roll off to go back to 2, or I can roll on one of these profiles to see what it looks like. And I can compare each one of these to the original 2 that I've selected. And I can click on them to select them, or I can just roll over to preview them. I think that this number 2 is a good starting point. It gives me a good balance of tones in the building as well as the sky. So let's close down the profile browser. We will use B&W number 2. The next thing that I want to do is crop the image. So let's go into the crop module. You can select crop overlay here or hit the R key. This will bring up the crop tool. Now in this case, I want to keep most of the building. I've got a little too much sky at the top of the image, and I think I'll take this from its original format probably down to a 4x5. So we'll just make a little shift to 4x5 here, and then I will slide the image up to crop a little bit off the top, and that'll give me a nice 4x5 ratio. And then I can close this to go back to the basic panel. And so I'm going to go into the mask panel, and I'm going to select a sky mask. It tends to do a pretty good job, but it's not always perfect. So you can see in this image, it's done a good job of selecting the sky, but a little bit has bled over into the building. If I zoom in to 100 and highlight the building, you can see that there's a little bit of this green color that's coming into the building. That's not great. So there's a couple ways we can approach this. The first way that we'll do is we'll do a subtraction, and we're going to subtract an object. So this will allow us to say we want to keep the sky, but we don't want this object. And I need to identify what the object is. So I'm going to use my mouse wheel to change the size of this selector here. And then I'm just going to roughly outline the object, which in this case is the building. This is the part that I want to exclude from the sky mask. I'll color it all in, but really I'm just worried about the edges at the top. And we'll see how good of a job that Lightroom Classic does of identifying the edges. So you can see it kind of cleaned up some of the edges here, especially along this edge. It didn't do such a good job in this corner, and maybe not so much along this edge. So the other option you can take when cleaning up an edge is to do a subtraction with the brush. So let's go up to our masks, and we're still in mask number 1. I'm going to take mask number 1 and I'm going to rename it Sky, just for clarity, so that I can keep track of this compared to all my other masks. Let's do another subtraction, and this time I'm going to subtract brush. Now I want to go in and brush out the areas of the building that I don't want captured. I'm spending a lot of time on this mask, and the reason is that I'm going to be reusing this mask a few times, and so I want it to be good. Sometimes for some images, I might not spend as much time on the mask, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one. I'd really like these edges to be nice and clean. So now that I'm working with the subtraction brush, I'm going to go to 100%. And over here in the left in the navigator, I'm going to grab and drag this, and I'm just going to work my way along the left side of the image. I can use my mouse wheel to identify what I want to subtract. I can adjust the feather over here on the right. And of course, I want the flow to be 100% because I want to completely eliminate. My highlight circle goes from yellow to sort of purple here. And that's an indicator that I'm holding my mouse button down so that you can visually see that I'm holding my mouse button down. And I'm going to work along this edge, do my subtraction. So I'll just spend a moment here working my way along the image and subtracting all of these edges so that I get a nice clean edge. I'll use the navigator to move my way around the image. So now that I've gotten all my edge taken care of, now I have a nice clean mask for the sky. This mask is only going to be affecting the sky. It's not going to be affecting the building. Now let's move on to making some adjustments to the sky now that I've done this mask. So we'll notch the contrast up, to maybe around 30-ish, just to give a little bump to the contrast. Let's roll down to the curve, the tone curve as part of this mask. I find, especially in monochrome black and white images, I tend to use the tone curve a lot to adjust the tones of an image. It's a very powerful tool, especially now that we can combine it with masks. So what I'm going to do is start with a preset, this strong contrast preset, but I'm going to make some adjustments. So what I'll do is I will grab these dots, and you can see when my cursor turns to the big up and down arrow, that's when I'm grabbing one of these dots. If you look behind the tone curve, you can see this graph in the background, kind of like the histogram, that represents the intensity of each tone. And this is going to help me to identify where I want to place these dots. So for example, I'm going to take this dot, I'm going to kind of keep it where it is, but I'm going to increase it slightly. You can see that there's a big cluster down here of the darker tones of the image. I'm going to take this middle dot and I'm going to bring it down closer to this area. And I'm going to start dragging some of these dots down to darken up the sky. If I was to grab a line and go way off, you could see it's going to throw things off. So I want to try to keep the line relatively smooth, but I'm going to make adjustments to these dots. And you'll notice that what I'm doing here at the image right now is particularly focused on the upper left-hand corner, so making that a lot darker by making these adjustments. The right-hand side of the sky is very bright. We'll deal with that in a minute. But right now, I want to adjust the dark part of the sky. I want to keep the clouds bright, but I want the sky to be very dark. So that's why I'm making the adjustments that I'm doing, is to go for that really strong, high contrast look. If I accidentally click and add a dot because I haven't selected a dot, I can very easily hit Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to get rid of that dot and go back and make sure that I'm working with the dots that I want to be working with. So I've got the curve where I like it. Let me make some additional adjustments. I'm going to take the dehaze for this sky mask and I'm going to crank it up to maybe around 30. That will again increase this contrast and make the sky very dark and make the clouds very bright. In addition to working in the curve, I can also make adjustments up here to the tone area. Bring the highlights up a little bit to add a little punch to the clouds. If I wanted to bring the blacks down even further, I could do that. So I can make little adjustments here. These will be similar to the adjustments that you're making down in the curve, but you're going to have much more precise control in the curve area. I tend to do a combination of both. Okay, so this has the left side of the sky looking pretty good, kind of where I want it. Now I need to work on the right-hand side of the sky, and I'm going to create a new mask for that. So let's go to Create a New Mask, and I will select that, and then I'm going to select Radial Gradient. And so I'll start here on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm going to click and drag and draw kind of a circle roughly here. I don't want to get too much into the building, but I want to cover the brightest spot of the sky here. Now that I've done this, I'm going to come down to the tone curve, and instead of using a number of points, I'm just going to grab and create a single point in the tone curve, and I'm going to drag this down, and you'll see this will really darken up the sky so it's not so bright compared to the rest of the image. Get that where I like it. And then I think in addition to that, I'm going to add a little bit more dehaze, because I want to punch up the clouds a little bit and darken the sky. So I'll do a little bit more of that on the right. And this gives me that very punchy, high contrast cloud look that I'm looking for. If I wanted to, I could also come back and adjust the highlights so I can play around with different parts of this image using the tone or using the curve, the tone sliders or the curve. Either way works well. That is my sky, and I like the way that the sky looks. Next up, I want to focus on the building. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to be very precise about the mask that I made for the sky is I'm going to use that same mask for the building, but I'm going to do an inverse of it. I'm going to select sky. I'll click on it. And then if I right click on sky and select duplicate and invert mask, I find this to be a great way to kind of give me a head start. In this case, I have some clean lines, but especially in landscapes, I find this to be a really useful tool. So I've got my sky inverted, and I'm just going to rename that to building, so I know that this is the building that I'm looking at. You can see here that I've got a little bit of bleed. I did a good job with the edges into the building, but I've got some bleed through in some of the sky. I'm going to hold down my space bar, and then I can drag around the image to see this close up. And I want to get rid of this because I want to continue to clean up this edge so that I make sure that the effects that I'm applying to the building are not going to impact the sky. So let's do the same kind of process. I'll start down here in this area. I want to eliminate any of this green overlay that appears in the sky. So if I go to the buildings portion of my masks and I select subtract, and I can use brush. So now I will be creating a brush, and I'm going to create a rather large brush, and we will just eliminate this green here in the sky. And I'm actually going to reduce the feather because I'm going to try to be pretty precise about this, where this falls. We'll get this lower edge. And now I can work my way up. To move around the image, I can either go to the navigator and drag in the navigator, or I can hold my spacebar down and then drag with my mouse by clicking and dragging the image. And then if I let go of the mouse, I go back to using whatever the tool was that I was using. So let me eliminate some of this overlay in the sky. And that looks pretty good. If it's very light, if you see some very light overlay, usually that's not a big deal. It's not going to have as much of an effect, but again, I'm trying to get a nice clean edge for this image. All right, now that I have my building mask, let's actually apply some effects to the building. Go down to my curve and apply a strong contrast so that I can start to get some punch into this building. But it's a little dark right now, so let's go back up to exposure. We'll drag up the exposure a little bit so I can bring up the exposure just a hair, maybe a little more than a stop, but not too much. So this will give a little bit of life to the building, so it's not too dark. Now I can adjust some of the tones here. to bring out some of the features of the building. I want to add a lot more highlight because there's not a lot of highlights going on here. Bring up the shadows a little bit and maybe some whites. So in addition to the exposure adjustment that we made. So now we have a little bit more life in the building itself. So let's go down to the effects and I'll add some texture. I tend to run about 30-ish for texture and clarity for these types of images. And then sometimes I'll add a little bit of dehaze, but you've got to be really careful with the dehaze with non-sky subject matter, because it can be very heavy-handed. So I'm just going to use a little touch of dehaze to add a little bit of contrast, but not too much. Okay, so the image is looking pretty good, but right now I feel that my eye is too drawn to this left side of the building, which is rather bland, and I want to make that a bit darker so that it doesn't draw so much attention. I could use like a linear gradient to just draw on the left side, but then that would affect the sky as well. So I want to have an effect on the building, but not on the sky. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. We'll start with the building. So I'm going to go to the building mask, and I want to make a copy of it. So we'll right click on the building mask and select duplicate building. When I do this, it's going to get a little crazy at first because I'm basically applying all of the settings twice. Let's clean this up a little bit. First of all, I'm going to take my building and I'm going to just say, instead of building copy, I'm going to say building left side so that I know what this mask is. And then I will go into the panel, the top of the panel where it says reset. And this will eliminate all of the settings. So I keep the masking that I have for the building, but I've eliminated all of the settings. Now what I want to do is apply the gradient, but apply it in addition to the building. And the way we can do that is with an intersecting mask. We've seen subtracting from a mask. You can add to a mask. We want to intersect two masks and only affect the areas where they overlap each other. There's a couple ways we can do that. You can right click on the mask and select intersect mask with, and then that will pull up all of those options. The other way to do it, go down between the add and subtract button, and if you hold down your Alt key, then it will change into an intersect button. And if I click that, then it'll give me this pop down. So I'm going to intersect my building left side with a linear gradient. So now that I've selected that, now I can draw my linear gradient on the image. So I'm going to come over here to the left side of the building, and I'm going to draw a gradient that is about parallel with the corner edge of the building here. If you look at the overlay, the green overlay in the image, this gradient is only affecting the building. It's not affecting the sky, which is exactly what I want. I can make some adjustments here. This gradient can change. In fact, I think I will grab the middle part here and pull it a little farther into the building, and we'll go roughly there. So what I want to do is really darken the building up. So let's just go over to exposure and pick I'm going to really drop this down substantially, like maybe a stop and a half almost, and really darken up that left side of the building. Now that I've made that adjustment, I can go back and tweak the linear gradient. So if I want to adjust how much it's having an effect here, for this image, it takes some attention away from the left side of the image and brings it back to these balconies. That's really nice, but one of the problems here is that it's kind of having a uniform effect on the windows, which I don't think works as well. It's not as natural for me. So I actually want to eliminate those windows from this mask. So let me zoom in a little bit so I can get a better view. We'll pick one of these windows to work with. So we'll start with this window here on the left side within this gradient. So within the building left side, I'll click that, and I'm going to select subtract and then object. And then what this will allow me to do is to select an object that I want to remove. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to reduce the size of this circle. And then when I get it to the size I want, then I want to draw this red outline to highlight the window. And I'm going to let Lightroom pick the selection for me. So I can release there, let it do its thinking, and voila, there we go. It did a pretty good job of highlighting the window. If I turn on the overlay, we can see the green appear, and look at that. It did a really good job of actually highlighting where I did not want this mask to apply, which is on this window. Now let's scroll down to the next window, and let's do the same thing again. I'll turn off the overlay. We'll select subtract, object, And then I can come over to the window and I can draw on the window. And I'm just trying to, it doesn't have to be a perfect match, because what you're doing is you're asking Lightroom to decide what the edges are of this object. So now I will let go and we'll let Lightroom think for a minute, and then it will tell me what it thinks the edges are. And there we go. Showing the overlay. We'll turn the green overlay on, and now we can see Lightroom did an excellent job of highlighting this window and subtracting it from the mask, and therefore subtracting it from this gradient that I've built. I've got one more window down here, so let's do this one more time. Just leave my green mask on this time. I can still see enough of the window to be able to highlight it. Alrighty, so let's see what Lightroom does in trying to identify this object, this third window. Now, this one, as you can see, cuts across the bottom edge of the frame, and so Lightroom is a little less certain about what the edges are. Didn't quite do as good of a job. That's okay. We will enhance this with a brush. So let me change my zoom to 200, because I'm going to be doing some fine brushwork here. We'll go into this same mask and hit subtract, brush, and then I will use a brush. I'm going to reduce the size of it with my mouse wheel, and then I'm going to subtract out the green color, the mask from this, and now we will have our third window. If I go back to fit in the navigator, now you can see my mask for the left side of the building. I've got the cutouts for the windows. If I was to select the gradient, you'll notice that I still have full control over the gradient. Let me turn the overlay off so we can see the effect of this darkening of exposure that I'm applying. So I can now visually see where I want this darkening to be, and I'm only adjusting the gradient. I don't have to make any changes to the windows. It's going to remember those objects separately. This is one of the things that's really nice about masking in Lightroom Classic and in all the versions of Lightroom now, is that because each mask can consist of a variety of objects, brushes, gradients that are all independently controllable, you have a lot of flexibility to come back and tweak these as you go, which is a little bit different than the methodology that's used in the masking in, say, Photoshop with layers. I actually really like this methodology. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit, and I'll settle there on where I want this to be. Now I have made my adjustments to the building. The next thing I want to do is probably draw some attention away from the bottom. I've got that building adjustment is taking care of the left edge. The right edge is pretty clean. The top looks good, but I've got kind of a clustered bottom here with the building here. So let me create another mask. We'll do a linear gradient, and I'm going to pick a spot here and draw upward, this time keeping kind of parallel with the building pieces, the bricks of the building. Get that on a good angle. All right, we'll drag this down a little bit more. And really, I just want to darken up the bottom of this image to draw your eye upward. So we will take the exposure down, let's see, maybe somewhere around 2/3 of a stop. So there we go. Now that kind of diminishes the eye being drawn to the bottom and brings it back up into the center. I'm going to switch to 12%. This will allow me to zoom out and make sure that I can see the entire image within my view and see if there's any other changes that I want to make. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Although, you know, these marks on the side of the building are a little bit distracting. So let's go in and make some little adjustments there. I like to sometimes use the healing brush to deal with things that are distracting. Now, I'm not going to get rid of all of this, but maybe just deal with the brightest spots. So I could use healing, or I could use the content aware. Let's just try healing for now and see what that does. So I'm going to make a very small circle, and I'm just going to highlight that area, and I might just do a couple more just to kind of address some of these distractions. This one, we'll refresh this one because that's actually the spot I'm going to do next. Very good. And then maybe a little one here. All right. Maybe one more. Okay, so that addressed the worst of it. Maybe I'll just grab this one up here too. Get rid of some of this, the water water stains coming down the side of the building. So now I'll turn off the healing brush and go back to my normal view. And there we go. I think that that's a lot better. I want enough of them to show like texture and reality, but I don't want spots that are a big distraction from the point of the image, which frankly is the face of this building, the balconies, and the sky. So there we go. There is our finished image, this 850 nanometer infrared monochrome image, and the processing that you can do in Lightroom Classic. What are your favorite techniques for editing monochrome images in Lightroom Classic? Please share those in the comments below. If you'd like to learn more about infrared photography, check out my book, Color Doesn't Exist, a practical guide to infrared photography. It's full of details for photographers at all skill levels. Now available in print and ebook editions, check it out at infraredbook.com. If you find these videos helpful on your infrared photography journey, like, subscribe, or comment. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.